The topic, which retirement accounts to use. The goal of this video, and technically the blog post too, is to walk you through the different types of retirement accounts. And while we can likely give you an order to how it should happen too, we're going to try to keep it a little bit more open-ended and walk you through the main retirement accounts that you see out there, their pros and cons to each one, and give you some details to work with. That's all coming up next. Stay tuned. Okay, so before we get into any of the actual accounts, let me just give you a heads up. The first goal you should have is how much do you even need to save? Do you actually know that answer, right? You just start saving, you save and you save and you save, but what is your magical number? And your magical number will vary. There's life's course corrections, things will change, we get that. But many years ago, we presented at the American Society of Colon and Rectal Surgeons down in Nashville. And my topic that I presented on was, when can I retire? So I had to think of a way to, what's the easiest way to give a large group of surgeons an easy formula to figure out how much do I need to save? And I figured it out. It was a multiple of their spending. Their spending really in retirement is how we're looking at it. So in simple terms, if you spend $100,000 per year, you need $3 million. It's a 30-time multiple. And if you doubt me, you can always hop onto our blog. Actually, the actual blog post for this video, which is in the notes, the show notes below, will also have a link directly to it inside of the blog post. So you can click on the when can I retire, which will take you to that blog post. And then inside of there, if you scroll to the very bottom, there's an Excel spreadsheet and you can type in your living expenses, how much you need. I also gave you numbers you can change. So what's the actual rate of return? So what does the market give you? And then you want to plug in inflation too, so then you have a real return number. But I'll give you the actual calculator. You can plug those in and it's going to give you the number. But just to keep it simple, if you spend if you spend $100,000 per year, we were using, I believe in the initial, it was a 3% real rate of return. So 3% rate of return in the market, 3% inflation, 3% real rate of return. And that gave you that 30 times multiple, which ended up being 3 million. So let's just get started there. What is your number? How much do you need to even save in all these accounts? Let's start there. Okay, you have your number, right? You got your number? All right, let's build on it now. So the first disclosure we should put out there is, don't forget anything that's in a pre-tax account, like a 401k, a 403b, a 457b, and assuming you didn't save up Roth because you were a high income position and you did pre-tax, as you should have, don't forget anything in your 401k, 403b, 457b, likely you're going to pay a good portion of that in taxes still. So make sure you're including that in your calculation. But our first stop, 401k, 403b. We link these together for a few reasons. Usually they act very similar. One is pretty much for profits, one is for non-profits. Same limits, the $19,500 using today's dollars. Obviously, it depends when you're watching this video. That is the 2020 and 2021 limit. If you're older than 50, you get the bonus. You can get up to $26,000, but they act the same, right? Pre-tax going in, tax-deferred growth while it's in there. You pay Uncle Sam when you pull it out. Some things to keep in mind. Some plans allow for in-plan conversions from pre-tax to Roth. When would that be a good idea? Well, you could make probably a good argument that it's difficult for physicians to do that, even if the market gets crushed. Now, you might be able to fill in a tax bracket, but just keep an eye on that. So when the markets have their days, and we know they will, and they will continue to always have their days, you may have an opportunity in there to convert some of that over to Roth. And that's important when you really think long-term tax planning, because the bigger issue we see is you build up everything pre-tax. RMDs, required minimum distributions, which are now at age 72, can start to create tax issues, forced tax issues that you did not want. And there's ways around it. You can do QCDs and things of that nature. But one of the easier ways to do that is start moving some money over to Roth ahead of time. And you can even do this maybe after you retire, but before you have to do those 72, because when you retire, likely lower income. So just keep those things in mind. That's a little bit overly complicated. I did not plan to get into that in this video, but hey, you have some notes to work on now. But that is your first place to go. If you're just getting started, as always, at least get the full match from your employer. In addition to that, most of our physicians, any physician really in an attending world, should be maxing this out. It should be relatively easy to max it out. Obviously, some specialties, some circumstances may make that a little bit more difficult, but for many, that should be step one. And then another fun buzzword to throw in here for you, just see if you have something called after-tax contributions. So we're always used to seeing this $19,500 limit, but if you have after-tax contributions, you may be able to save even more. Now, it's not going to be a tax deduction. It's after-tax money that goes in, but it's tax-deferred while it's in there. And based on current rules, you can actually take those contributions, not the gains on them, just the contributions. The contributions can roll into a Roth IRA at separation of service. Some plans allow it internally, but let's just assume it's separation of service. This is that cool term called a mega backdoor Roth IRA. So first stop with a few little extra complicated layers in there just to give you something to think about. 401k, 403b, probably the most common retirement accounts that we're used to hearing about. Next section is the HSA, the health savings account. And one quick note to add, going back to my last section, the reason why we don't note SEP IRAs or simple IRAs is because we want you to use something called a solo 401k. Why? Because a solo 401k allows you to keep doing backdoor Roth IRAs. SEP IRA, simple IRA do not. So this is why when we speak with new clients or talk with anyone, we're trying to always get SEPs and simples moved into a solo 401k, or if you're starting from scratch, start with that solo 401k if you have that 1099 income. But now back to the main star of this section, the HSA. My main disclosure with HSAs are this. Make sure you buy the proper health insurance plan for you and your family. So don't go out of your way to get a high deductible plan just to get the tax benefits of the HSA, because more than likely those out-of-pocket medical expenses are probably going to do a lot more than offset the tax benefits. So just always keep that in mind. The HSA is a fabulous tool, triple tax benefit, tax deferred going in, tax deduction while it's in there, tax deferred while it's in there, tax-free when you pull it out, assuming qualified medical expenses. Even if you don't utilize it for medical expenses and you're 65 or older, you just pay income tax on ordinary income tax. What does that sound like? The definition of an IRA. Tax deduction going in, tax deferred while it's in there, pay Uncle Sam ordinary income tax when it comes out. So this is why we call it that stealth IRA. It can start to act like a bonus retirement account. So in a perfect world, when you're funding your HSA, you're not utilizing those funds. And really, most HSA providers today also allow you to invest them. Again, really starting to look like a bonus investment account. But if you can avoid using that, pay your medical expenses out of pocket, that's where that HSA really can get some steam. And mostly it's just because of compounding interest. So the second account, really I guess technically the third account that we're referring to, is just the wonderful triple tax benefit health savings account. In short, we call it the old HSA. Next up, the 457B, the one retirement account that really takes on a split personality. If it is a government 457B, you have the green light to take full advantage of it. It is pretty much a bonus 403B, 401k, however you want to call it. It's a bonus account. And a 457B is on its own separate island. So you can do the $19,500 or the $26,000 if you're 50 or older to the 403B, 401k. But then you can also do another $19,500 or $26,000 if you're 50 or older to the 457B. Again, based on 2020, 2021 numbers as I record this video. So those numbers obviously just change with inflation when the government feels the need to make that update. But 457B from a government perspective, bonus account, take advantage of it. Where things start to get a little bit more iffy is on private 457Bs. And two reasons. One, I think scares us more, but it doesn't happen as often. That's the idea of that if the hospital goes under, their creditors are most likely coming in to take all those funds. They're not your money. They're in a separate account for the hospital or for the company in this example as well, and the creditors can come after it. And most likely they're going to come after it. They're coming after it. So while that is terrifying, and it does happen every now and then, it does not happen all that often. But we should always still put the disclosure, it's possible, right? The bigger issue we see with 457Bs is, what's the actual distribution? How do you get the money out at separation of service? Sometimes you'll see, in a perfect world, they'll say you can roll it over to another non-government 457B. In that example, fantastic, right? That actually makes it a lot easier. Sometimes they don't allow that. And then they'll say you have to withdraw it in a short period of time. Now, sometimes they'll give you more common withdrawal options and you can really stretch it out, which helps because you're just trying to stretch out the taxes, right? We're trying to stretch them out as far as possible and get them as close to retirement age as possible, because then your income's down, so naturally your tax bracket should be lower. But the problem comes in is when they say you got to pull out everything by April of the following year, or you need to have all the money out within the next 2 years, or we're going to send you a check 30 days after separation of service. That's where we can start to run into some tax issues. And you could make the argument, but aren't we just paying taxes on what we deferred earlier? Sure, but not really what we're aiming for when we start to do that tax deferred savings. So 457B government, green light, go for it. 457B private, yellow light, do some research, see what the separation rules are, what that could look like. Also, if you're in a hospital and you're like, man, I think they're all probably filing bankruptcy next week, probably not a good time to start the 457B on the private side with them either. But again, that one, terrifying, but doesn't happen all that often. Usually that's separation of service. But either way, just see if you have it. Know what your options are. If you can take advantage of it, great. If you like the private 457B because you did your research, great, take advantage of it. But just know your options, do your research. It's another investment bucket to look at. Next up, the famous Backdoor Roth IRA. So the funny thing about Backdoor Roth IRA is we actually don't save anything in taxes today. This is where when we build plans, we say we may not beat the IRS every year, but our goal is to definitely beat them in the long run. The Backdoor Roth IRA is one of those tools that allow us to do that. So we'll pay taxes today, but ultimately we get tax deferred growth and completely tax-free withdrawals, assuming they're qualified withdrawals when you go to take them out. So for the Backdoor Roth IRA, the reason why it gets that term is because as a physician, you make too much money to go directly to a Roth IRA. So we have to add in this little workaround where you make a non-deductible contribution to an IRA. Make sure you don't have any other IRAs, SEP IRAs, simple IRAs, regular traditional IRAs, looking at all of you. So $6,000, $7,000 if you're 50 or older, into traditional IRA, we label this as a non-deductible contribution. The funds settle, you then convert it to your Roth IRA. You're done. That's the Backdoor Roth IRA for the year. Put that reminder on your calendar at the start of every year. And we like to get in the habit of the start of every year because you just get an extra year of tax-free compounding growth. So anytime we can add to our compounding clock, we want to lock that in. Some clients, mid-year, late year, they might do it just because of cash flow issues, but in a perfect world, you're trying to get that done earlier in the year. Again, not a tax benefit today, but in the long run, good tax benefit, and also helping us diversify our actual tax buckets from an account perspective come financial independence, retirement time. Last but not least, the taxable account. For many of us, the taxable account is two things. It's an individual taxable account or it's a joint taxable account. Either way, they act the same, and they're called taxable because there's no tax benefits inside of them in the form of a tax deduction or tax deferred growth. You likely are going to get a 1099 every year from any type of interest or dividends that are built out from the portfolio. But it's a bonus account. It's your overflow account. It's the account that will actually probably become rather significant over your working career. So a few things to keep in mind here. Build it as tax efficient as you can to get started. Much easier to be organized from the start. And by tax efficient, we mean take advantage of ETFs, which are just known as exchange traded funds. They just act a little bit more, they're a little bit smarter on the tax side than what a mutual fund would be. I won't bore you with the why. There's plenty of individuals that can walk you through that on just a basic Google search, but just know that ETFs historically are more tax efficient. In addition to that, you can also look to add in municipal bonds. Municipal bonds, big benefit is you don't pay federal taxes. Also, if you buy your state or maybe possibly even your local municipal bonds, you could also avoid federal, state, and local taxes. So there's some benefits to municipal bonds. So just keep that in mind. You're trying to build tax efficient with ETFs, and also adding in municipal bonds if you're going to add a bond allocation into that account. So the taxable account will become your overflow account. Really a good account too to build up. Remember we said earlier about our 3 buckets? So you got your pre-tax, your after-tax, Roth, and then taxable. This is also another account because depending on when you want to achieve financial independence, this adds a lot of flexibility. Now there are ways to get to qualified money ahead of time. The most simple rule is just called a Rule 72T, but still, it just adds flexibility from both a tax perspective, but also it's fully accessible. There's no special rules on it. So the last account on our list for today was the taxable account. And from there, I'm going to transition right into our closing remarks. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you enjoyed walking through all the accounts. I hope you got some good ideas here. If some of these accounts sound new, ask HR. Do we have this? Do I have a 401k that has after-tax contributions? Are there allowed Roth conversions inside of it? Do we have a 457B? Is it government or is it private? Am I doing a backdoor Roth IRA? What are all these accounts? Should we open up a taxable account? What are all these different accounts that we can take advantage of? That was the goal of this post. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, thank you for tuning in and listening. I hope this was helpful, and we'll catch you on the next video.